UFC 1, officially known as Ultimate Fighting Championship 1, marked a revolutionary moment in combat sports history when it took place on November 12, 1993, at the McNichols Sports Arena in Denver, Colorado, introducing the world to a concept that had never been seen on a mainstream stage before. The event was built around a simple yet highly controversial question: which fighting style works best in a real fight? And instead of debating theory, UFC 1 chose to provide answers through direct competition. With a tournament format, almost no rules, no weight classes, and a raw, unpolished presentation, the event shocked audiences and captivated millions, creating the foundation of what would later become modern mixed martial arts. Fighters entered the cage representing single disciplines, making UFC 1 feel less like a sport and more like a live experiment designed to test reality against tradition. The driving force behind UFC 1 was Royce Gracie, a member of Brazil's legendary Gracie family, who believed deeply in the effectiveness of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu when applied in real combat situations. Rorion wanted to demonstrate that technique, leverage, and ground control could overcome size and striking power, especially against opponents unfamiliar with grappling. Alongside businessman Davie, he transformed this vision into a pay-per-view event, not with the intention of building a regulated sport, but to stage an authentic test of martial effectiveness. Their collaboration brought together fighters from vastly different backgrounds, creating an atmosphere of unpredictability, danger, and raw competition that immediately separated UFC 1 from traditional boxing or wrestling events. During the early 1990s, martial arts existed largely in isolation, with boxing, karate, wrestling, taekwondo, and kung fu operating within their own rule sets and communities, each claiming superiority over the others. Cross-training was rare, and mixed-style fights were often hidden in underground venues with little exposure. UFC 1 shattered these boundaries by placing all styles into a single elimination tournament, forcing fighters to confront unfamiliar techniques and adapt under pressure. The results exposed the limitations of single-style fighting and highlighted the importance of versatility, fundamentally changing how combat athletes trained. This moment did not just crown a winner. It changed the philosophy of fighting forever and ignited the evolution of mixed martial arts as a global sport. UFC 1 featured 8 fighters, each stepping into the cage as a representative of a distinct combat discipline, including boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, savate, sumo, taekwondo, and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, making the tournament feel like a clash of worlds rather than a traditional sporting event. There were no weight classes, which meant fighters of dramatically different sizes could face each other without restriction, creating moments that felt shocking and even unbelievable to audiences. This absence of size limits added intense unpredictability as viewers watched smaller technical fighters attempt to survive against much larger opponents, reinforcing the idea that UFC 1 was a real experiment rather than an exhibition designed for fairness or safety. The rule set of UFC 1 was minimal to the extreme, stripping combat down to its rawest form, with no rounds, no judges, and no time limits to offer relief or structure. Fighters could only win by knocking out their opponent, forcing a submission, or when a corner decided to stop the fight to protect their fighter. The only techniques that were banned were biting and eye gouging, which highlighted just how dangerous and unrestricted the competition was. This lack of rules shocked the sports world and fueled controversy, but it also drew massive attention, as audiences had never seen combat presented with such brutal honesty and intensity before. The fights took place inside an 8-sided cage, later famously known as the Octagon, a structure specifically designed to prevent fighters from falling out of a traditional ring. At the time, the cage appeared violent and intimidating, giving the event a gladiator-like atmosphere that unsettled many viewers. Despite the initial criticism, the Octagon quickly became one of the most recognizable symbols of the UFC, representing both confinement and combat. The very first fight in UFC history set the tone immediately, as Gerard Gordeau, a skilled savate kickboxer from the Netherlands, faced Tila Tuli, a massive sumo wrestler from Hawaii. Tuli's weight exceeded 400 pounds, creating a jaw-dropping size difference that led many to believe his sheer mass would overwhelm his opponent, setting the stage for a dramatic and unforgettable beginning to UFC history. As the opening fight began, Gerard Gordeau immediately relied on movement, distance control, and sharp leg kicks to avoid being clinched or grabbed by the much larger Tila Tuli. One perfectly timed kick sent the massive sumo wrestler crashing to the canvas, and Gordeau followed with a quick series of punches to the face that ended the bout in seconds. The sudden finish stunned the audience, instantly challenging the long-held belief that size alone guaranteed dominance in a real fight. In a matter of moments, UFC 1 delivered its first lesson. Skill, timing, and strategy could overcome even the most overwhelming physical advantages. This dramatic opening bout set the tone for the entire tournament, making it clear that UFC 1 was not about spectacle alone, but about revealing uncomfortable truths about combat. The sight of blood, broken teeth, and unprotected fighters created an intensity rarely seen on television, leaving a lasting impression on viewers. There were no gloves to soften strikes, no rounds to offer recovery, and no rules to slow the action, which made every exchange feel dangerous and final. As news of the event spread, UFC 1 quickly gained attention for its raw brutality and realism, drawing both fierce criticism and unstoppable curiosity from fans around the world. Another unforgettable figure in the tournament was Art Jimerson, a professional boxer who made a striking entrance into the cage wearing only one boxing glove. His unusual choice symbolized complete faith in his punching ability, while also revealing uncertainty about what might happen if the fight went to the ground. This single glove became one of the most iconic images of UFC 1, representing the experimental nature of the event and the unknown dangers fighters were stepping into. Jimerson's appearance highlighted how unprepared many specialists were for a fight without familiar rules or boundaries. Art Jimerson was matched against Royce Gracie, a calm and soft-spoken fighter representing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, who stood out immediately due to his traditional gi and composed demeanor. Compared to the muscular strikers and larger athletes, Gracie looked unimpressive to many viewers, lacking visible aggression or intimidating size. Few expected him to dominate, and even fewer understood the depth of his skill set. Yet this underestimation would soon prove to be one of the greatest misconceptions in combat sports history, as Gracie prepared to quietly demonstrate the power of technique, leverage, and ground control. When the fight began, Royce Gracie wasted no time in closing the distance, stepping inside Art Jimerson's punching range and immediately taking the fight to the ground. Using leverage, balance, and precise technique, Gracie controlled the boxer with remarkable ease, neutralizing his strength and eliminating his ability to strike. Jimerson, completely unfamiliar with ground fighting and unable to escape, chose to tap out without absorbing heavy damage. This quick and almost effortless victory shocked viewers and revealed how helpless even a skilled striker could become once trapped on the mat. This moment became one of the most important turning points in UFC history, as it clearly demonstrated the critical role of grappling and submissions in real combat. Audiences around the world suddenly understood that punching power alone was not enough, and that fights could be decided without dramatic knockouts. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu instantly gained global recognition, as fighters, trainers, and martial artists began to realize its effectiveness in controlling and finishing opponents of different sizes and styles. The bout reshaped how people viewed self-defense, competition, and martial arts training, planting the seeds for the evolution of mixed martial arts. Another major presence in the UFC 1 tournament was Ken Shamrock, a professional wrestler and shoot fighter with a background that blended strength, aggression, and submission-based techniques. Shamrock represented a more hybrid approach to combat, combining wrestling control with joint locks and chokeholds, making him one of the most dangerous competitors in the field. His intense demeanor, physical power, and experience in realistic fighting environments set him apart from many of the more traditional stylists. From the moment he entered the cage, Shamrock looked prepared for the chaos and unpredictability of UFC 1. Ken Shamrock was matched against Patrick Smith, a taekwondo fighter known for his athleticism and flashy kicking techniques, who attempted to use speed and long-range strikes to maintain distance. Smith relied on movement and kicks to keep Shamrock away, hoping to avoid being taken to the ground. However, once Shamrock managed to close the distance, the dynamic of the fight shifted instantly. The striking exchanges gave way to clinching and grappling, exposing the limits of long-range techniques when confronted with relentless pressure and submission-based control, further reinforcing the lessons UFC 1 was teaching the world. Using leg locks and superior grappling awareness, Ken Shamrock quickly neutralized Patrick Smith and forced him to submit, ending the fight in decisive fashion. This victory further reinforced the growing realization that ground-based techniques were not just effective, but essential in real combat situations. As the crowd watched these early submissions unfold, the focus began to shift away from flashy strikes and dramatic knockouts. Viewers started to understand that control, positioning, and technical dominance often mattered far more than spectacle or raw aggression. Royce Gracie continued his remarkable run through the tournament by facing Ken Shamrock in the semifinals, a matchup that immediately captured attention due to both fighters specializing in submissions and ground control. Unlike earlier bouts filled with chaos and heavy strikes, this fight unfolded as a tense and technical battle, with each man carefully searching for openings. There was little wasted movement, as both fighters respected the danger posed by the other's grappling skill. This contest showed a more refined side of UFC 1, proving that intelligence and patience could dictate the outcome just as much as physical power. Gracie relied on calm composure, timing, and positional awareness to avoid Shamrock's superior strength and explosive energy. By methodically taking the fight to the ground, Gracie slowly imposed his style, advancing positions and limiting Shamrock's options. Once he secured a dominant position, Gracie applied a submission that forced Shamrock to tap out. This victory solidified Royce Gracie's reputation as the most effective fighter in the tournament and confirmed the dominance of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu against even strong and experienced opponents. The semifinal win became one of the defining moments of UFC 1, symbolizing the triumph of technique over force. The final fight of UFC 1 brought Royce Gracie face-to-face with Gerard Gordeau, the same fighter who had delivered the event's shocking opening knockout. Gordeau entered the final carrying a serious disadvantage, a broken foot sustained in his earlier fight, yet he still chose to compete. His willingness to continue reflected the raw, unforgiving nature of the tournament format, where fighters advanced regardless of injury. As the final began, the contrast between Gracie's calculated approach and Gordeau's battered but determined presence captured the brutal reality of early UFC competition. The final fight began with Gerard Gordeau attempting to rely on his striking to keep Royce Gracie at a distance, using movement and kicks despite the clear pain from his injured foot. Gracie, calm and patient as always, quickly closed the gap, avoided prolonged exchanges, and brought the fight to the ground where he held a clear advantage. Once the fight hit the mat, Gracie moved with precision, taking Gordeau's back and securing a tight rear naked choke. Within minutes, Gordeau was forced to submit, bringing a decisive and controlled end to the tournament's final bout. With this victory, Royce Gracie was crowned the winner of UFC 1, achieving something that seemed impossible at the time, defeating 3 opponents in a single night, each representing a completely different fighting style. His performances were not based on brute strength or aggression, but on composure, leverage, and technical mastery. Gracie's calm demeanor, lack of emotion, and effortless control over much larger and stronger opponents left a powerful impression on viewers. In one night, he changed how the world understood fighting, proving that strategy and technique could overcome size, power, and intimidation. UFC 1 sent shockwaves across the United States almost immediately after it aired, sparking intense controversy among politicians, medical professionals, and media figures. Critics condemned the event as violent, dangerous, and irresponsible, arguing that it had no place on television. Senator John McCain became one of the most vocal opponents, famously labeling the competition as human cockfighting and calling for it to be banned. These criticisms fueled public debate and placed the UFC under heavy scrutiny, threatening its future before it had a chance to grow. Despite the backlash, UFC 1 also revealed something impossible to ignore. There was a strong and growing public interest in realistic, unscripted combat sports. Pay-per-view sales exceeded expectations, demonstrating that audiences were fascinated by the raw honesty of the fights and the answers they provided. Encouraged by this success, the organizers decided to continue producing events, gradually refining the format while keeping the core idea alive. This early momentum laid the foundation for the UFC's evolution into a regulated global sport, transforming controversy into opportunity and marking the beginning of a new era in combat sports history. The impact of UFC 1 reached far beyond the cage, forcing martial artists around the world to seriously rethink how they trained and prepared for real combat. Fighters quickly realized that relying on a single discipline was no longer enough, as striking without grappling or grappling without striking left dangerous gaps. As a result, athletes began cross-training in multiple styles, blending wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, and submissions into a more complete approach. This shift in mindset marked the true birth of mixed martial arts, transforming isolated fighting styles into a unified system designed for real-world effectiveness. UFC 1 was vastly different from the modern UFC audiences recognize today, with no gloves, no weight classes, and almost no rules to guide competition. The raw nature of the event created intense controversy, but it also highlighted the need for structure and safety if the sport was to survive. Over time, regulations were gradually introduced, including weight divisions, time limits, gloves, and medical oversight. These changes allowed the UFC to gain approval from athletic commissions, move into mainstream venues, and grow into a legitimate global sport while still preserving the essence of real competition. The legacy of UFC 1 is often misunderstood as being centered on violence, but its true significance lies in innovation and honesty. It stripped away tradition, ego, and theory, revealing which techniques actually worked under pressure and which failed when tested. The event exposed the limitations of rigid styles and rewarded adaptability, control, and efficiency. Fans were no longer watching scripted entertainment or point-based contests, but real problem-solving under extreme conditions, forever changing how martial arts were perceived and evaluated. Royce Gracie emerged from UFC 1 as an international icon, not because of flashy knockouts or intimidation, but because of calm dominance and technical mastery. His victories demonstrated the effectiveness of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu on the world stage, sparking a global surge of interest in ground fighting and submissions. Almost overnight, gyms teaching BJJ began appearing across continents, influencing law enforcement, military training, self-defense systems, and competitive sports alike. Gracie's success reshaped the martial arts landscape in a way few individuals ever have. Looking back today, UFC 1 feels raw, experimental, and almost unreal when compared to the highly regulated, polished product of modern MMA. The lack of safety measures, the mismatched opponents, and the unpredictable outcomes make it feel like a relic from another era. Yet without this risky experiment, modern mixed martial arts would not exist. UFC 1 was the spark that ignited a global phenomenon, proving that reality could be more compelling than tradition. UFC 1 remains one of the most important events in combat sports history, not because it answered every question, but because it dared to ask them. It challenged assumptions, reshaped training philosophies, and created an entirely new sport. Its influence continues to shape fighters, coaches, and fans today, standing as a reminder that progress often begins with bold and uncomfortable experiments.